Okay, Wukdar, good challenge, and much better than asking for an apology, since some of the energy of my annoyance with Amendum definitely slipped into my response to your comments there. So fine, and kind of a little mocking, that's good, about the quantum physics, because obviously, you can't tell me to involve quantum physics in every single calculation, for various reasons. Okay, you can't ask me to do that, make that demand. But the reason you still can't do that is because it doesn't necessarily apply to every case. But I'll tell you what, I will apply quantum physics. But you don't need quantum physics to solve this problem. I'll supply some information of how thinking in terms of metaphors from quantum physics do in fact affect this problem with additional information. Okay. First of all, the killing of the puppy. I did see it, and it was really terrible. It is wrong. Now, I don't say absolutely wrong because of the semantics. You can't say absolutely, except for this situation. It's wrong to inflict suffering for the pleasure. See, semantically, my point about relativity and skepticism is explaining this exception. Why is there the exception? You're just saying it is an exception, and I'm saying why it's an exception. And here's how it works. Well, as I've said, I think there's echelons of frames of reference, frames of identity that you use to make a morality from. I mean, the first shell is very personal and selfish, but it's, how you should treat yourself and give yourself respect and things like this, and those are important rules. But they're not as enlightened as if you take a broader frame of reference, for example, humanity. And I've also pointed out you have some options to what you identify with, like if you're going to identify with your township or not in these kinds of groups. They're cohesive just if they are cohesive, if you feel they're cohesive, if you can identify as a part of them. But some of them, you don't really have a choice about it. You are a human. As a human, you need air to survive. Is that absolute? No, because not every object needs air to survive. Not even every object that can be said to survive or not necessarily even needs air. So it's about you. You are a human. You don't have a choice of that frame of reference. And within that sphere, there's some truths within that sphere, okay, of being a human. And it's wrong to kill your cousin. Okay, so that's one echelon, the humans there. Now consider, if those were just three guys in the desert and they found that puppy and they need to eat that puppy to survive, that would be different morally. Why? Because, okay, outside of your human frame of reference is a broader frame of reference of all the mammals. All the mammals, we're mammals. That puppy is a cousin of ours, very, somewhat very distant, but then again in the history of the universe, not that distant, the genetics is not, we have genes in common, for God's sake. We're definitely cousins. Though, and that's a broader frame of reference. Now, as I said, when there's a conflict between an inner and an outer frame of reference, it's still moral to go ahead and use the inner frame. It's less enlightened, but it's still moral. So if you needed to eat a puppy to survive, it might be a tragedy. And I myself might not do it. I might decide to keep the enlightened frame because I do love animals so much. And, maybe I would starve rather than kill that puppy. But then again, I think it's okay. Predation is explained by these relative spheres if your survival really depended on it. But obviously, their survival did not depend on it. So what they've done is they've broken a moral in a sphere without any reason. There's no reason on any of the inner spheres to violate the enlightened sphere of not killing living things. So that explains why there might be a reason, okay, in some cases. Those reasons don't apply in this case, so it's just wrong what they've done, and it was just wanton. They are choosing a less enlightened sphere wantonly. Okay, and that's why I say that's immoral. Now on ZZZ3333, maybe I should just call them Z's threes, kind of point, it's a similar thing. I'm sympathetic with wanting to be a warrior for the ecology or something, but there's a limit. I think it's great, the old Greenpeace tactic of getting their boats in between the whalers and the whales. It's great to camp in a tree that they're trying to cut down from a virgin forest. But it's not okay to tree spike because that would actually harm humans. That would violate a more prioritized, your inner spheres, your inner survival. If the survival of the human race is really threatened, then it's less enlightened, but you can rely on this inner sphere if there really is a conflict, okay? A lot of the conflicts people say they have, oh, we need to do this, they're really just being lazy. We know that there is a way to make the enlightened frame of reference work, that we can cooperate with living creatures. A lot of people say, no, it's not possible, it's us or them. And, the only argument against those people is that they're wrong. No, it's not us or them. We can make it all work out together. If you don't believe that it can work out together and it really is us versus them, then yeah, there's a reason that people like that give themselves permission to do horrible acts, because they're refusing to take an enlightened frame. Again, as I say, morality is for us to act. I believe we should take a wider frame. I believe we can make laws based on some of these frames, based on as a consensus of how enlightened we all want to be as human beings. Hopefully that's very enlightened. I think a lot of humans are tending towards this. I don't think there's a problem. A lot of people want to be enlightened enough that they want to take the moral frame of reference of the whole biosphere. Okay? But you can't, to me, you can't activate at that level and violate some inner level. Or at least you can't be expected to. Now, I do believe people can, it feels so good to be in an enlightened state. Even if your personal safety and your personal survival is threatened, you don't have to collapse. It's understandable why you collapse to a personal survival thing, but it doesn't mean that you have to. You can't say, you know what, I like this enlightened frame of reference. I'm not going to hurt another living being, even if I'm about to die. Okay? That's your personal choice. But in terms of a moral imperative, no, we understand why people facing their own survival will go ahead and violate some morality that applies at a greater level. And we say, well, that morality didn't really apply. If those guys really needed to survive, we would say it's a tragedy that there was a conflict between these spheres and they had to choose their own survival. But we'd be more understanding than when they just heave, this living creature off a cliff for no good reason. So the same thing applies with the indigenous people and the advanced people. Are they just greedy? That's what I think. I think they're being greedy. I think there's ways to have compensated those people or not use those resources or somehow taken those people into account, a frame of reference that acknowledged those people were related to the non-indigenous people that were coming in. I mean, the humanity between both those indigenous people and this other group means that they should be taken in a common group, and that everybody's frame of reference should be taken into account. If that's violated, then it's a moral violation. Now, it's absolute within the frame of reference of being a human, but see, that's not absolute. That's just for humans. And that's why I'm saying, with the example of if an alien comes along, that, they might have a different set of rules, or we might have to understand that it's not automatic. That just like if they need to eat a human to survive, maybe there is a moral reason they would kill a human. And the way we would avoid that is by having a more enlightened frame. The fact of the matter is, I think it's in our best interest to have this more enlightened frame. And therefore, it works out fine, because though we give permission people to collapse their frame down, if we insist that they're honest, they can't just say that there's a conflict. That they can't just say, well, my survival required having fun killing somebody. You can't just say that. It actually has to be a real conflict. And that can all be determined by facts within these frames of reference, like that you're human, like that you're cousins with that dog. So, I mean, that's the way I analyze it. And, emotionally, I just have the same gut reaction of disgust that most anybody has. But, I mean, in terms of analyzing why, that's why. It was this wanton collapsing of an enlightened frame of reference down to a more selfish frame of reference. And really not even just to a humans versus puppies thing, because it's really just this squad of guys, not all humans, okay, versus one puppy that, really, if we want to look at the issues here, even leaving that puppy without its mother, they found it without the mother, I guess, or the mother was dead or whatever, probably was going to die. I mean, so the enlightened thing to do would actually be to help it survive. But then again, if they just let it go its own way and let it survive on its own, that we would kind of, maybe also understand a little bit, but it starts to invoke the fact of maybe a needless collapsing of the frame of reference, a needless lessening of the enlightenment in terms of the frame of reference used, where the enlightenment is very clearly using the broadest reference frame possible for your decision. If you notice, that's also objective. To be objective is to use the widest, all the facts, the widest, all the known opinions, all the known positions, the widest known thing possible. The reason I'm not an objectivist is because that's never the complete set of everything out there. But it can be pretty expanded, and that's the definition of enlightenment, and that is how I judge an act of cruelty like this. And that's also why I'll say a lot of people would not have been as offended at that video if it was a rat. But that still would have been just as wrong, because if a rat, let's say a rat needed to be killed for these survival reasons, then it should have been put out of its misery. You certainly wouldn't want to throw a rat down there, just be cruel, and it maybe just breaks a hip and a leg and gets more disease. Let's say, if it was a diseased rat and that's why it had to be killed, it might just get more disease before it actually passes away. And because it's not just this emotional revulsion of that is a cute puppy and the rat might not be so cute. It's really these spheres of reference, okay?